reading of Bill 39. Back to the Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a much debated bill, but I think it makes a lot of sense. There's some legacy here across governments, and we're very proud as a government to have phased out coal across Ontario, the largest greenhouse gas emissions reduction in the history of North America, Mr. Speaker. And it goes back, and there's some shared legacy here. As we remember, the member for Waterloo, Ms. Whitmer, I think it was back in 2002, took motions to close the first coal closure, which was in Mississauga. It was interesting because she said at the time that it would probably lead to increased prices for energy, and she was quite articulate about balancing those kinds of things. But the prices, the cost to Ontarians of keeping these things open was much more significant and much more severe, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of debate on this in the earlier readings of the bill, Mr. Speaker, so I don't want to belabor the point. But one of the things that I find quite interesting is I've had a few people say, why is the government bringing forward a bill to close coal plants and to make it law that you can't open them? It's a very good question, Mr. Speaker. But you know, one of the biggest challenges with climate change, Mr. Speaker, is coal. And you may know that in 2011, the government of Germany, Ms. Merkel, who I have an amazing amount of respect for on the international issues of Syria and immigration, she is an incredibly principled leader of great integrity. Her government, however, decided in 2011 to shutter all 17 nuclear plants. You can imagine what would happen to our energy profile, Mr. Speaker, in Ontario if we made a decision as Germany did or as Japan did or other decisions to close all our nuclear plants. And so when the member for Oxford, I think sincerely asked, why would you put this in law? Well, if Germany, after it had started to phase out coal, had actually made a decision that it was going to keep carbon-intensive industries out of the rule, they would not be able to do this, right? It would certainly be a good debate. No, and it's interesting right now because the amount of coal production in Germany is huge. They are becoming more and more reliant on coal. We have a 15% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020, Mr. Speaker. You know, Germany is at 40%. So, for the member from Oxford, it creates some challenges if you've committed to a 40% reduction in GHG emissions and you close 11 nuclear plants, and then coal becomes the default replacement. The same thing has happened in Japan, and you see coal plant closures now expanding in places like Turkey and Brazil. So what it means is that some of those countries like Germany are continuing to meet their GHG emissions targets, but it's coming at a huge cost. And the other thing that's happening in some of these countries that have actually brought coal back online is that they've lost investor confidence. You know, we just did our IPO with Hydro for the 15%, and we got good value out of that. Do you know that over 53% of investors in energy in Germany right now have frozen their investments because of the controversies around coal production? Germany is also dealing with huge health issues from lignite-generated coal. So there are Japan, understandably, because Japan is a short-term solution to the Fukushima disaster, which I know we all have great empathy and pray for the folks in Japan who lost lives. It was a huge tragedy, and we know the vulnerability and the dangers that go with energy are very real. So I don't think this is to be taken lightly, and because we're in a jurisdiction right now where we have good geology and we don't have some of the vulnerabilities that some of those places do, but it is not an exceptional situation to see countries reverse themselves and open up coal. So when we're voting as a legislature, whether we're talking about the work that someone like Elizabeth Whitmer did, or Jim Bradley, Dalton McGuinty, and many other folks in this House from many parties who worked very hard to make these very difficult decisions to get us to a carbon-neutral economy. And, Mr. Speaker, the implications of the level of carbon dioxide at 400 parts per million right now in our atmosphere won't be felt for another 50 or 60 years. And we just have to look at what's happening right now. It is estimated by scientists that the major drought events going on in the world are 2 to 3 times more likely to be happening because of the level of carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere 50 or 60 years ago. California produces 90% or more of our strawberries, our broccoli, most of our basic vegetables, and 35% of all of our food in North America. California is now in 5 years of an extreme drought. There is no other place in the world in which Ontarians outside our own borders are more reliable for food. And that's affordable food for families. It jumped about 20% last year, our imported food. We know that the level of 5 years of extreme drought, and NASA now projecting and saying, as has the Pentagon, that these are climate-related events. We know the situation in Syria, Mr. Speaker, was preceded from 2005 to 2011 in probably the worst drought in human history. It is estimated that Syria lost, prior to 2011, 60 to 80% of its food production. And over 800,000 farmers lost their farms, and about 2 million people, one of the largest domestic migrations in human history within a country, migrated into the large cities. At the same time, 1 million refugees were coming from the Iraq War. That created a destabilized situation. The country lost its food production, was losing its water supply because of a drought. That drought began again in 2013. Now, you can't say all of these things are direct A to B climate change related, but as the folks at NASA and the Goddard Centre and the United Kingdom Academy of Sciences have said, the possibility of that extreme level of drought that would force agricultural collapse and the loss of a rural middle class is not very likely without the changed conditions on this planet. So the preconditions for our own food supply, as the Pentagon said, climate change is now destabilizing regions like Sudan because it's creating food and water crisis that in countries that already don't have enough capacity and already have problems with famine. These things create conflicts and are catalysts and accelerators of conflict. So on a global scale, as we lead up to Paris, we're going to go in there very, very proud. And I don't just mean our Liberal government. I hope all members of the Legislature that we have closed coal plants and we're committing to keep them closed. And that puts us not just in the minority of countries that have phased out coal or jurisdictions, but we're one of the jurisdictions that's committing, unlike other major players in the world like Japan and Germany and some of the emerging economies, to keep them closed. So if we think this is a light commitment we're making, Speaker, it's not. It's a commitment that many of the world's most successful and largest and most powerful economies have not been able to keep. And so in the spirit of nonpartisanship and our planet and our children, I'm hoping we will not only vote for this, Mr. Speaker, but we'll vote for it with great pride, because this is a legacy of all members of this legislature. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.